Hello and welcome to World News on TVP World. I'm Marie Cato. Poland's Central Police Investigation Bureau has detained 18 people believed to be involved in a sex trafficking operation that raked in hundreds of thousands of euros. Officials say the group had been operating in several major Polish cities. 15 of the detainees are Ukrainian citizens. The trafficking ring preyed mainly on women from the war-torn country, exploiting their difficult living circumstances to recruit them into prostitution. Officials say the suspects earned nearly 30,000 euros from trafficking a woman who had been tricked into paying an intermediary 11,000 euros. The group is believed to have been operating in Kraków, Warsaw, Wrocław and Poznań. Investigators found that the gang is likely to have earned more than 200,000 euros from its criminal activities, and say that up to several dozen women could have been involved in procuring the victims. Poland recorded over 110,000 cyber attacks targeting public institutions in 2024, a 23% increase compared to the previous year. According to the Polish Minister of Digital Affairs, all of the incidents can be tracked back to Russia and Belarus. In response, the minister emphasized the measures taken by the government in Warsaw to safeguard the upcoming presidential elections, highlighting both technical and strategic efforts to strengthen national cybersecurity.
We launched a broad set of actions. The Internal Security Agency conducted a multi-segment security test at the National Electoral Commission. Audits were carried out, recommendations were issued, and concrete steps have been taken to secure our systems. These efforts also include training provided to National Electoral Commission staff. For this election, we've gone even further, down to the level of regional electoral commissions, to ensure that this knowledge reaches those responsible for the process at every level. In addition, we're working with the country's largest service providers and digital platforms to counter disinformation. We've strengthened and launched a new program run by the NASK Research and Academic Computer Network, focused specifically on detecting and responding to disinformation campaigns. We've also begun informing all electoral committees about the types of incidents that can be expected, including assessments of their potential impact on the campaign. This process is already underway. Committees are receiving regular updates, and candidates have also been provided with information.
Outgoing German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is in Poland on Wednesday for talks with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. This is one of Scholz's last official engagements as the German leader.
The talks between Chancellor Scholz and Prime Minister Tusk, which will take place over lunch, will focus on bilateral relations and international issues. Both leaders will also discuss European policy, including security and defense, during their meeting. Wednesday's visit to Poland will be Scholz's last as Chancellor to this country and takes place some 3 weeks before expected new German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is set to be sworn in the first week of May.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said that the, quote, era of naive globalization has come to an end. Economist Witold Orłowski explained in an interview with TVP World that Tusk is referring to the world's growing instability and that while countries such as Poland might be tempted to implement protectionist policies, it has its risks.
The underlying message is we are living in a dangerous world. We cannot be naively optimistic. A lot of bad things may happen. A lot of things that we believed are absolutely safe, the supplies, the goodwill of our partners, the cooperation with our allies, and so on and so on. We are no longer sure. We cannot be any longer sure. So we must be stronger ourselves. This is, I would say, I'm very sorry to hear those words, because that's showing the state of the world these days. But on the other hand, I must say I do understand why the Prime Minister has said so. The pessimistic scenario is that the state intervention is influencing to a big degree the functioning of the firm, to such a degree that rather than becoming more efficient, they become more self-confident in a sense that they do not have to do a lot, because the government in any case will force everybody to buy the services and so on and so on. There is a thin red line between the good intervention and the bad intervention, and that's the art to do it in a way that is good for the economy.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff are expected to travel to Paris later this week to discuss Ukraine, among other issues. Our correspondent in Kyiv, Oz Chatterjee, has more.
A senior US delegation is heading to France later this week for discussions with the French government regarding US ceasefire proposals for Russia's war on Ukraine. Now, we understand this delegation will include Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the US Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff is expected to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron, and Marco Rubio is expected to meet with the French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot. They're expected to have further discussions about the ceasefire proposals, but also France and Britain's proposal for a coalition of the willing to deploy inside Ukraine to monitor any kind of ceasefire. Now, there still doesn't seem to be any sign of any pressure coming from Washington on Moscow regarding trying to bring them to the negotiating table to agree to a ceasefire. This must be said that Putin rejected the US offer for a ceasefire, whereas Ukraine accepted an unconditional ceasefire. There still hasn't been any pressure put on Moscow from Washington regarding this, and this is going to be causing concern in Ukraine, not just following attacks like the one we saw on Sunday in Sumy, but also the words coming from Steve Witkoff talking about these 5 illegally annexed regions of Ukraine that Russia claims as their own, being the key to ending the conflict, with Washington indicating through Witkoff that they see granting the Russians control over, or at least partial control over these oblasts as some sort of way of sweetening the deal and getting Russia to agree to any kind of ceasefire. This would effectively mean capitulation for the Ukrainians, and they would not accept territorial concessions such as this. So the US is really in a difficult position here when it's trying to negotiate a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, when it's treating Russia with all carrot and it's treating Ukraine with all stick. So the Ukrainians are in a difficult position here, and they'll be hoping that European leaders such as Macron can put further pressure on Washington for more favorable outcomes to Kyiv through meetings such as the ones that are happening in Paris this week. It's Oz Chatterjee reporting from Kyiv for TVP World.
While the West has collectively put sanctions on Russia and prohibited the sale of electronics to the country, Chinese companies are very eager to fill the gap. Hundreds of Chinese producers attended an electronics exhibition in Moscow, showing off their wares. Reports indicate the demand for Chinese electronics has increased dramatically due to Western sanctions. The sellers also play an important role in sanctions evasion. While Western companies are not allowed to sell electronics to Russia under the sanctions regime, chips and other high-tech components from the West still find their way into Russian weapons systems used against Ukraine. Chinese companies buy the parts under the pretense of domestic use, only to clandestinely sell them on to Russia. New data shows Russia's birth rate has plunged to its lowest in centuries. Despite state incentives and policies promoting larger families, the population continues to shrink at an alarming pace. According to Russian statistics agency Rosstat, the country recorded just under 200,000 births in the first 2 months of 2025, a 3% drop from the previous year. February alone saw an even steeper decline, with some regions reporting drops of over 20%. Rosstat estimates the first quarter of 2025 will mark the lowest birth rate since the early 1800s. Long-term forecasts project Russia's population potentially shrinking to 130 million by 2046, numbers not seen since the era of the Russian Empire. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said negotiations on Black Sea security are underway in Turkey. Speaking from the port city of Odessa, Zelensky went on to say that the meeting concerns the coalition of the willing, primarily France and Great Britain. Additionally, the Ukrainian president commented on the progress of negotiations with the United States over the mineral deal.
In addition to the talks between Putin and US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, there are other talks in the world. A military meeting on the issue of Black Sea security is underway in Turkey. This concerns primarily the coalition of the willing and the corresponding steps. As we said, there are already enough meetings. Various formats of the coalition of the willing and able are being discussed. Regarding security in the Black Sea, today it is being discussed, during these 2 days, in Turkey. Our Turkish colleagues invited representatives of Europe. These are Britain, France, and Ukraine is necessarily present, and the site that hosts, Turkey. The military is discussing the issue of security in the Black Sea. The mineral deal negotiations took place. They were positive. This was a technical meeting of the technical team, and meetings at this level in different formats, in addition to offline meetings, but also online contacts, will continue throughout this week until the end.
3 people were wounded and fires erupted in residential buildings after Russia launched an overnight drone strike on the Ukrainian city of Odessa. Yet another assault on a city vital to Ukraine's grain exports.
Just before 1 a.m. local time, the Ukrainian Air Force reported groups of Shahed drones approaching Odessa from the Black Sea. Later in the night, the city's mayor called on residents of Odessa's 2 districts to find shelter. As stated by the city official, rescuers, psychologists, and police are still on the scene clearing the rubble and supporting the wounded both physically and mentally.
According to reports by the Kiel Institute, Europe is leading the way in supporting Ukraine ahead of the United States by 23 billion euros. The data included military aid as well as financial and humanitarian support. Since the beginning of the full-scale war, the European Union provided Ukraine with 138 billion euros compared to 115 billion euros worth of support delivered by the US. The Institute noted that since Donald Trump took office, the US has not approved a single support package for Ukraine. The last was approved in January by his predecessor, Joe Biden. Simultaneously, the European Union is providing continuous support for Ukraine. On the other hand, when counting solely military support, the United States is still in the lead. Overall, Washington, D.C. supported the Ukraine military with equipment worth some 65 billion euros. Europe, however, is behind by only 1 billion. And that concludes World News at 2 p.m. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned for more on TVP World. Goodbye.